the tragedy of the Titanic and its enduring place in popular imagination after 110 years. The Titanic in the early 20th century. The Titanic stood as a symbol of engineering excellence and luxury at the beginning of the 20th century. It was designed to be the largest, most luxurious, and safest passenger ship in the world, a testament to human innovation and ambition. The grandeur and ambition of the Titanic. The Titanic was not just a ship, it was a masterpiece of technology and design. It was seen as unbeatable and unsinkable, reflecting the era's overconfidence in science and human capability. The tragedy of the sinking. The Titanic's disaster, which unfolded on the night of April 14 to 15, 1912, shocked the world. The collision with an iceberg and the subsequent sinking resulted in the deaths of over 1,500 people. Among the victims were many members of high society, amplifying the tragedy's global impact. A global shock. The Titanic wasn't merely a ship, it was an international sensation. Its passengers included the wealthy, the influential, and the famous, and their loss sent ripples of grief and prompted serious reflections on maritime safety. Legends and myths. The Titanic quickly became the subject of countless stories, legends, and myths. Theories about the sinking abounded, ranging from criticisms of the ship's design and the insufficient number of lifeboats to conspiracy theories about who might have been responsible for the tragedy. Cinema and pop culture. The Titanic story has remained alive in collective memory through numerous films, documentaries, and books. Most notably, James Cameron's 1997 film Titanic not only brought the ship's story to life, but also immortalized the tragedy for new generations. Symbolism. The Titanic is often seen as a cautionary tale of human excess. It represents how humanity's attempts to defy nature and assert invincibility can be undone by its own flaws. The ship also symbolizes the struggle for survival and the cost of human ego. The legacy of the Titanic. Post-tragedy developments. After the sinking, significant changes were made to maritime safety regulations. These included stricter requirements for lifeboats and more rigorous safety procedures. The discovery of the wreckage. In 1985, over 70 years after the disaster, Robert Ballard's expedition located the Titanic's wreckage 12,500 feet below the ocean surface. This discovery reignited fascination with the tragedy and deepened the mystery surrounding it. The Titanic in popular memory. More than a century after its sinking, the Titanic remains one of history's greatest tragedies and enduring mysteries. It occupies a permanent space in popular culture, with museums, exhibitions, and frequent references in films and literature keeping its story alive. Maritime rivalries. The Titanic story cannot be separated from the fierce competition between Cunard and White Star Line during the early 20th century, a rivalry that shaped the race for dominance in luxury ocean liners. The economic context and the growth of maritime trade. The golden age of passenger ships. The early 20th century marked the height of transatlantic transportation. Passenger maritime trade was growing rapidly, especially between Europe and North America. This period was characterized by mass immigration to the United States, but also by a demand for luxury and comfort, as the upper class frequently traveled between continents. The profitability of maritime trade. Passenger ships were essential in connecting the old continent with the Americas. Competition in this sector was fierce, as companies sought to attract wealthy and influential travelers while securing the largest share of the immigrant transportation market. The two major companies, Cunard and White Star Line. Cunard Line. Founded in 1839, Cunard Line was one of the oldest and most renowned companies in the sector. It already dominated the transatlantic market with its luxurious ships, including the famous Lusitania and Mauretania, celebrated for their speed. Innovation and speed. Cunard focused on building fast ships capable of crossing the Atlantic in the shortest possible time. The Lusitania and Mauretania were the fastest of their era, and Cunard continuously sought to break its own records. White Star Line. Established in 1845, White Star Line was Cunard's primary competitor. Under the leadership of Jabe Bruce Ismay, The company developed a different strategy. Instead of focusing solely on speed, White Star Line prioritized comfort, luxury, and grandeur. Focus on comfort and luxury. White Star Line aimed to offer a travel experience centered on passenger comfort, with luxurious accommodations and on-board attractions, rather than merely trying to set speed records. The rivalry and Bruce Ismay's challenge. Bruce Ismay and the Olympic-class project. To compete with Cunard's emphasis on speed, Bruce Ismay, president of White Star Line, devised an ambitious plan to create a new class of ships that would stand out for their grandeur and luxury rather than their speed. He envisioned 3 ships, the Olympic, the Titanic, and the Britannic, all designed to surpass Cunard's vessels in terms of comfort and innovation. Responding to Cunard, Cunard had already launched the Lusitania and Mauretania, which were the benchmarks for speed. White Star Line decided to focus on building larger, more luxurious ships, recognizing that competition would be intense. They aimed to create a class of vessels offering a superior travel experience, something their rivals were not prioritizing. The Olympic-class project. The beginning of construction. The first ship of the new class was the Olympic, whose construction began in 1908. The Titanic project followed shortly after in 1909, with both ships being built side by side in shipyards on a monumental scale. A shift in focus. While the Olympic was designed as a luxury ship, the Titanic took this vision even further, introducing more innovations such as the famous first-class dining saloon, a swimming pool, and elevators. The goal was to create the largest and most luxurious ship in the world, a marvel of naval engineering and a symbol of the power and wealth of those who traveled aboard. The construction of the Titanic and its connection to rivalry. Ismay's strategy. The construction of the Titanic was, in fact, a direct attempt to compete with Cunard, which still dominated the seas with its fast transatlantic liners. Ismay believed the Titanic would not only outshine Cunard's ships but also redefine what a passenger ship could be. The race to be the biggest and the best. The rivalry between the two companies intensified as the Titanic took shape. The goal wasn't just to build a large ship, but to create a vessel that symbolized the strength and grandeur of the British Empire and innovation in maritime engineering. The legacy of rivalry and the Titanic's impact. The significance of competition. While Cunard was the initial rival, the construction of the Titanic further highlighted White Star Line's role as a giant in the industry. Even after the tragedy, the name Titanic remained synonymous with luxury and an era that seemed invincible in terms of technological capability. The lasting effect. After the Titanic's sinking, Cunard and other shipping companies reassessed their approaches to safety and comfort. The disaster led to new maritime safety standards and transformed the shipping industry, a change directly influenced by the fierce competition between these two major players. The Titanic's design. How it, alongside the Olympic and Britannic, was conceived to stand out in grandeur and comfort. The Olympic-class project. White Star Line's challenge. At the dawn of the 20th century, White Star Line, led by Bruce Ismay, sought a way to surpass its competitors in transatlantic passenger transport. Cunard Line dominated the market with its fast ships, such as the Lusitania and Mauretania, but White Star Line took a different approach. Focus on comfort and grandeur. While Cunard prioritized speed, Ismay and his team at White Star Line decided to invest in a class of ships that would stand out for their immense grandeur and the luxury offered to passengers. The goal was to build not just large ships but vessels that delivered an unprecedented level of comfort and elegance. Creating 3 ships, Olympic, Titanic, and Britannic. The Olympic class. White Star Line began by planning 3 large luxury ships, the Olympic, Titanic, and Britannic. The Olympic was launched first, followed by the Titanic, with the Britannic intended as a safer, more comfortable ship after the Titanic's tragic fate. Majestic scale. While the Olympic was a masterpiece, the Titanic was designed to be even grander, with cutting-edge innovations and unparalleled luxury. Grandeur and innovation in design. Imposing size. The Titanic was designed to be the largest passenger ship in the world. Measuring 882 feet in length and 175 feet in height, it was twice the size of many contemporary ships. This magnitude wasn't just for visual impact but to offer ample, comfortable spaces for passengers. Advanced features. The Titanic boasted several safety and structural innovations, although these ultimately proved insufficient to prevent the disaster. Unmatched luxury aboard. The Titanic was crafted to deliver an unparalleled travel experience. Key features included first-class dining room, one of the largest and most luxurious ever built, with ornate details and a grand ambience. Swimming pool and gymnasium. First-class passengers enjoyed access to an indoor pool and a gym, a first for its time. Elevators. The ship featured 4 elevators, a cutting-edge luxury. First-class cabins. Comparable to a luxury hotel, these cabins featured private spaces and exquisite furnishings. Second- and third-class accommodations. Although the focus was on first-class luxury, the Titanic also provided exceptional accommodations for second- and third-class passengers, ensuring relative comfort and well-being for all aboard. The ship's architecture. Thomas Andrews' vision. The Titanic's design was overseen by Thomas Andrews, a renowned naval architect from Harland and Wolff, the shipyard responsible for building White Star Line's vessels. Andrews aimed to create a ship ahead of its time, incorporating modern technology, safety, and comfort. Steel structure and watertight compartments. The Titanic's hull was made of 2,000 steel plates, up to 1.5 inches thick, designed to withstand significant damage. The ship also featured 16 watertight compartments, which could be sealed remotely to prevent flooding from spreading. These innovations led many to believe the Titanic was unsinkable. An obsession with perfection. Luxury in every detail. White Star Line aspired to make the Titanic the world's most luxurious ship. Every detail was meticulously planned, using fine materials, artistic decorations, and first-class amenities designed to impress and delight the wealthiest and most influential passengers. Artistic details. Beyond functionality, the Titanic was a masterpiece of art. Its interiors featured intricately carved wood panels, stunning stained glass, luxurious carpets, and custom-made furniture. The goal was to create an experience that made passengers feel as if they were aboard a floating palace. The Grand Staircase. One of the most iconic symbols of luxury on board was the first-class Grand Staircase, which combined elegance with grandeur, leaving a striking first impression on passengers entering the main hall. The legacy of the Olympic class. White Star Line's design philosophy. While the RMS Olympic was focused on establishing White Star Line as a symbol of luxury and comfort, the Titanic took this philosophy even further. The Britannic followed the same vision but incorporated several safety modifications after the Titanic's tragic fate. The Olympic-class ships marked a true revolution in naval design. Their emphasis on luxury and comfort inspired future transatlantic liners, even after the Titanic disaster. Technical details of the Titanic. Size, construction, watertight compartments, and safety systems. Size and dimensions. Length. The Titanic was an enormous ship, measuring 882 feet, 269 meters, in length. It was larger than many buildings of its time, making it one of the largest and most impressive vessels ever built. Width. The ship's beam was 92 feet, 28 meters, providing a robust and stable structure at sea. Height. From the keel to the top of the funnel, the Titanic stood 175 feet, 53 meters, tall, giving it a majestic silhouette visible from afar. Displacement. The Titanic had a displacement of approximately 46,000 tons, making it the largest and heaviest passenger ship in the world at that time. Construction. Harland and Wolff Shipyard. The Titanic was built at the Harland and Wolff Shipyard in Belfast, Northern Ireland. Construction began in March 1909, and the ship was launched on May 31, 1911. Hull structure. The Titanic's hull consisted of approximately 2,000 steel plates, each measuring 10 feet, 3 meters, long, 6.5 feet, 2 meters, wide, and 1.5 inches, 3.8 centimeters, thick. These plates were held together by over 3 million rivets, creating a solid and durable structure. Advanced technology. The ship incorporated the latest technological innovations of its era, including coal-powered propulsion systems and central heating. The Titanic also featured state-of-the-art radio communication technology and 4 massive funnels for ventilation. Watertight compartments and safety. 16 watertight compartments. The Titanic was designed with 16 watertight compartments. Each compartment could be sealed with watertight doors, which were remotely controlled from the bridge. This design aimed to contain water to specific sections in case of hull damage, preventing rapid sinking. Remote closing systems. The remote closing system for the watertight doors was one of the Titanic's most innovative features. Each door could be shut with a mechanism activated from the bridge, allowing the crew to manage water ingress without physically accessing each compartment. Belief in an unsinkable ship. Thanks to these watertight compartments, many believed the Titanic was virtually unsinkable, even if several compartments were breached. This overconfidence contributed to the ship maintaining high speeds, even in iceberg-prone areas. Safety systems. Lifeboats. The Titanic was equipped with 20 lifeboats, comprising 15 large lifeboats for 65 passengers each, 2 emergency cutters with a capacity of 40 passengers each, 4 collapsible lifeboats capable of holding 47 passengers each. Despite a total lifeboat capacity for 1,178 people, the Titanic carried 2,224 passengers and crew, leaving insufficient lifeboats for everyone on board. Inadequate training. While lifeboats were available, the crew lacked proper training for their use in emergencies. Many lifeboats were launched with far fewer occupants than their full capacity, exacerbating the tragedy. Innovations in safety. The Titanic's design included watertight compartments and lifeboats intended to ensure passenger safety. However, a combination of human errors and design flaws rendered these systems ineffective during the disaster. Propulsion and power systems. Steam engines and coal. The Titanic was powered by 2 steam engines, utilizing steam turbines and piston engines. To generate the necessary energy, the ship consumed up to 800 tons of coal daily, burned in 159 furnaces on board. 3 propellers. The ship featured 3 propellers, 2 large ones and a smaller central one. This configuration enabled a top speed of 21 knots, approximately 39 kilometers per hour or 24 miles per hour. While this was respectable for a ship of its size, it was slower than competing liners, such as those operated by the Cunard Line. Project failures and impact on the sinking. Compromised watertight compartments. When the Titanic collided with the iceberg, water flooded at least 5 of its watertight compartments. Although the ship was designed to stay afloat with up to 4 flooded compartments, the damage from the impact was significant enough to compromise the ship's buoyancy. Had the Titanic collided head-on with the iceberg, the damage would likely have been more limited, and the disaster might have been avoided. The compartment system was insufficient. Even with advanced safety systems, the failure of the hull and the inefficiency in containing water in the compartments led to the structural collapse of the ship. The combination of failures in safety systems, such as the insufficiency of lifeboats and the inability of the watertight compartments to prevent total flooding, resulted in the tragic sinking. Technical details of the Titanic. Size, construction, watertight compartments, and safety systems. Size and dimensions. The Titanic was a true marvel of engineering for its time, with an impressive size by early 20th century passenger ship standards. Here are its key dimensions. Length. The ship was 269 meters, about 882 feet, long, making it the largest passenger ship in the world at the time of its construction. Width. With a width of 28 meters, 92 feet, the Titanic had a broad and robust base, essential for its stability at sea. Height. The Titanic stood 53 meters, 175 feet, tall, from the keel to the top of its funnel, making it visible from great distances and adding to its grandeur. Displacement. Weighing around 46,000 tons, the Titanic was a giant in terms of capacity and construction. Titanic's construction. The Titanic was designed and built by Harland & Wolff, a shipyard located in Belfast, Northern Ireland. The construction process took over 3 years and involved a workforce of more than 15,000 workers. Some key details include Harland and Wolff Shipyard. Construction began in 1909, and the ship was launched on May 31, 1911, marking a milestone in naval engineering. Building materials. The Titanic's hull was made from approximately 2,000 steel plates, each 3 meters long and 2 meters wide. The steel plates were 3.8 centimeters thick and fastened with 3 million rivets. Cutting-edge technology. The Titanic incorporated the most advanced technologies of its time, including coal-powered propulsion systems, radio communication, and innovations such as electric lighting and central heating. Watertight compartments. One of the Titanic's most innovative features was its watertight compartment system, designed to enhance the ship's safety in case of hull damage. These compartments were separated by waterproof bulkheads and were intended to prevent water from spreading quickly through the ship. Number of watertight compartments. The Titanic had 16 watertight compartments, each isolated by a watertight door that could be remotely closed from the bridge. The idea was that if one compartment was damaged, water wouldn't spread to the others, keeping the ship afloat longer. Unsinkable theory. Because of this system, many believed the Titanic was unsinkable as it could withstand flooding of up to 4 compartments without sinking. However, the collision with the iceberg damaged 5 compartments, which proved fatal for the ship. Safety systems. While the Titanic was considered a masterpiece of engineering, the ship had serious shortcomings in terms of safety systems, which contributed to the tragedy that occurred that fateful night. Lifeboats. The Titanic was equipped with 20 lifeboats. 15 boats for 65 people. Large boats capable of carrying up to 65 people each. 2 emergency cutters. Capacity for 40 people. 4 collapsible boats. Capacity for 47 people each. Total lifeboat capacity. Altogether, the lifeboats could carry 1,178 people, while the Titanic was carrying 2,224 people on board, meaning there were not enough lifeboats for everyone. Despite this, many lifeboats were launched without reaching their full capacity, further exacerbating the tragedy. Lack of training and preparedness. Although lifeboats were available, the crew had not been properly trained to use them efficiently. The lack of drills and clear instructions led to lifeboats being launched with fewer people than their maximum capacity. For example, Lifeboat Number 7, the first to be launched, had only 27 people, even though it could have carried up to 65. Propulsion and power systems. The Titanic was powered by 2 high-capacity steam engines and a steam turbine, all fueled by coal. The ship consumed up to 730 tons of coal per day. To generate energy, the Titanic required a large amount of coal, which necessitated a large crew of stokers. Emergency communication. The Titanic was equipped with a modern shortwave radio system that allowed communication with other ships. However, the system was poorly utilized during the emergency, and many nearby vessels did not receive the distress signals in time. Navigability tests. Before its maiden voyage, the Titanic underwent rigorous sea trials that assessed its stability and the functionality of its systems. Despite these tests, the ship was designed for ideal conditions, and its crew was unprepared to handle a high-speed collision with an iceberg. Conclusion. While the Titanic was an engineering marvel, with impressive innovations in size, watertight compartments, and safety systems, the disaster that occurred on its maiden voyage was caused by a combination of human and conceptual failures. The failures in safety systems, such as the insufficient number of lifeboats and the lack of adequate crew training, contributed to the tragic sinking of the ship. These technical details and the failures associated with the Titanic's design continue to be analyzed and discussed today, serving as a reminder of the importance of safety in large-scale engineering projects. Start of the maiden voyage. Departure from Southampton and the first iceberg warning. Departure from Southampton, April 10, 1912. The Titanic departed from Southampton, England, on its maiden voyage on April 10, 1912, bound for New York, United States. This journey was highly anticipated, as the Titanic was considered the largest, most luxurious, and safest vessel ever built at that time. It left Southampton with 2,224 people aboard, including first, second, and third-class passengers, as well as the crew. Famous passengers. On board were some of the wealthiest men in the world, including John Jacob Astor, one of the richest businessmen of the time, and Isidor Straus, co-owner of Macy's. There were also several aristocratic families and high society members traveling on the ship in search of comfort and luxury. On-board environment. The voyage began with great enthusiasm, as passengers admired the luxurious facilities aboard the Titanic. First class offered an unparalleled experience, with exquisite dining salons, luxurious suites, a swimming pool, and even a squash court. For second and third class passengers, although the accommodations were simpler, they were still at a higher comfort level than many other ships of the time. The first iceberg warning. As the Titanic sailed toward the North Atlantic, it began receiving iceberg warnings from other ships, especially vessels navigating in nearby waters. These ice alerts were common during the spring in the Atlantic Ocean, as large icebergs floated in the region, especially along the final leg of the journey between Ireland and North America. Ice alerts from other ships. The Titanic received several warnings about the presence of icebergs in the waters it was navigating. These alerts were transmitted via radio and sent by other ships, such as the Mesaba, the California, and the America. However, the Titanic was traveling at a high speed, about 22 knots, the ship's full capacity, disregarding or underestimating the risks. The ignored warning. The Titanic's radio operator, Jack Phillips, was busy transmitting private messages for passengers, which led to failures in transmitting and properly addressing the iceberg alerts. One of the most critical alerts, sent by the California, which was in a very close location and could see the iceberg, was not transmitted in time to the Titanic's captain. This communication error became one of the crucial points leading to the tragedy that would unfold. Sea conditions and voyage environment. The weather on the night of April 14, 1912, was exceptionally calm, making it difficult to spot icebergs. The sea was very calm, with little wind and no waves, creating a mirror-like surface. While this tranquility was pleasant for navigation, it also made the ocean harder to scan, as the icebergs did not stand out easily. Limited visibility. The calm seas and lack of waves helped the lookouts spot objects on the horizon, but it made iceberg detection more difficult, as they weren't visible from a distance. The absence of a moon and the lack of nighttime lighting also made it harder to detect the approaching iceberg. Lack of binoculars. The two lookouts on the Titanic, Frederick Fleet and Reginald Lee, were stationed in the crow's nest, the ideal location to spot any obstacles ahead. However, for an unknown reason, they did not have binoculars available to assist in their observation. This further increased the difficulty in identifying the iceberg in time. The speed and Captain Smith's decision. Despite receiving several iceberg warnings, Captain Edward Smith maintained the ship's high speed without significantly reducing its pace. This was done to keep the schedule and ensure that the Titanic would reach New York as quickly as possible, without significant delays. Course altered. In response to the iceberg warnings, Captain Smith decided to slightly alter the Titanic's course southward, moving it away from the waters with higher concentrations of ice. However, even with the change in route, the Titanic continued to sail at 22 knots, an extremely high speed for the time and for the sea conditions, especially considering the risks posed by icebergs. The lack of caution. The decision to maintain high speed and not significantly slow the Titanic was a critical mistake. Many experts argue that if the ship had been sailing at a more moderate speed, the Titanic would have had more time to maneuver and avoid the collision with the iceberg. Conclusion. The beginning of Titanic's maiden voyage was marked by an atmosphere of great optimism, luxury, and confidence in the ship's capabilities. However, the combination of ignored warnings, the high speed maintained during the crossing, and the adverse visibility conditions created a high-risk scenario. The ship was so immersed in its invincibility status that warning signs, especially those indicating the presence of icebergs, were not taken seriously. These judgment errors, coupled with the unfavorable sea conditions, contributed to the disaster that followed. The fire on board, the coal fire and its possible relation to the hull damage. The discovery of the fire on board. During Titanic's maiden voyage, before its fateful collision with the iceberg, the ship encountered a fire in the coal storage compartments. This incident occurred early in the journey, and although it wasn't widely reported at the time, some later investigations and accounts suggest that the fire may have been more severe than the authorities initially believed. The location of the fire. The fire started in one of the coal compartments, areas designated for storing coal used to fuel the ship's boilers. These coal reserves were located at the lower levels of Titanic, a space difficult for passengers to access, but crucial to the ship's operation. The fire started before departure. According to records and investigations conducted years later, the fire began days before Titanic's departure, possibly due to spontaneous combustion of the coal. This was a relatively common occurrence on large ships, particularly those carrying low-quality coal. The fire spread slowly through the coal compartment, reaching a significant size even before Titanic departed Southampton. The crew's response and the combustion of the coal. The Titanic crew was aware of the fire, but initially, it was not treated as an immediate threat to the ship. Since the fire was located in an area where coal was stored to fuel the boilers, the situation was considered to be a manageable incident. Initial control. The fire was largely contained during the journey, but it was not completely extinguished. In fact, throughout the voyage, there was smoke and heat coming from the coal combustion area. The crew did their best to try to put out the fire with the resources available, but the smoke persisted, indicating that the fire was more active than expected. Ineffective combat against the fire. During the voyage, the fire was largely fought with water and smothering methods, but the intensity of the fire made it difficult to fully extinguish. This fire in the coal reserves was a significant factor that required considerable attention from the crew, but its more serious repercussions became apparent only after the ship collided with the iceberg. Possible relation to hull damage. After the impact with the iceberg, many experts and historians suggest that the fire in the coal reserves may have contributed to the hull damage of the Titanic, which in turn may have accelerated the sinking. Hull weakening. The most widely discussed theory is that the heat generated by the coal fire, combined with the extreme temperature conditions of the flames and the intense pressure on the steel plates of the hull, may have weakened the material of the ship, making it more vulnerable to the iceberg impact. When Titanic collided with the iceberg, instead of the damage being limited and concentrated only at the point of impact, the intense heat from the fire may have caused the steel plates of the hull to become fragile, facilitating the breakage of multiple compartments. Possible compromise of steel properties. The steel used in Titanic, forged into thick plates, may have been altered by the heat from the fire. Some experts suggest that the intense heat from the coal combustion would have reduced the strength of the steel plates, compromising their ability to withstand external pressure. This weakening of the plates may have been one of the reasons why the iceberg impact caused more extensive damage than expected, rupturing multiple watertight compartments and allowing water to spread rapidly. Historians and engineers debate the theory. The hypothesis that the fire contributed to Titanic's vulnerability at the time of the iceberg impact is debated by historians and engineers. Some point out that the hull damage was directly caused by the collision with the iceberg, while others suggest that the combination of the fire and the impact may have exacerbated the disaster. Still, most scholars agree that the fire on board was not treated with the urgency it required and may have been a contributing factor to the ship's structural failure. The severity of the fire and its consequences. Although the fire in the coal reserves was an isolated event during the voyage, its severity may have influenced Titanic's fate. The consequences of not fully extinguishing the fire before embarking on the journey are seen as a critical mistake that may have affected the ship's safety in extreme situations. Reduction in ship efficiency. The fire may have also reduced Titanic's propulsion system efficiency, affecting the ship's performance and possibly its ability to maneuver and avoid the iceberg. Had the ship been operating under ideal conditions, it might have responded more swiftly at the time of the collision, potentially avoiding or minimizing the damage. Covering up the fire. For a long time, the existence of this fire was hidden or downplayed by the authorities, even by Titanic's own engineers, who feared the incident would be used to question the ship's safety. Only decades later, after more investigations and searches of the ship's records, was the fire acknowledged as one of the factors that possibly contributed to the disaster. The fire in the coal bunkers aboard the Titanic is a lesser-known but potentially crucial episode in understanding the sequence of events that led to the sinking. The intensity of the fire in the coal reserves and the fragility of the hull, weakened by the high temperatures, may have been determining factors that compromised the ship's integrity during the collision with the iceberg. While the fire was largely contained, its effects may have been felt later, when the Titanic faced disaster on its maiden voyage. The iceberg impact, the late warning, lookouts without binoculars, and Titanic's collision with the iceberg. The iceberg warning, the late alert. Before the Titanic collided with the iceberg, the crew received several warnings about the presence of icebergs in the area, but the warning that could have prevented the disaster was not taken seriously or was received too late. The radio warning received. During the voyage, Titanic's radio station received multiple alerts from other ships in the region. These ships, such as the Californian and Mount Temple, reported icebergs along the Titanic's route. Communication between ships was repeatedly interrupted due to interference, but a clearer warning, indicating icebergs about 100 nautical miles, 185 kilometers, to the north, was recorded. The lack of urgency. However, these warnings were received by the Titanic in a rather relaxed manner. Captain Edward Smith and the ship's officers did not take immediate action to slow down or change the ship's course, actions that might have prevented the collision. Many historians suggest that there was an excessive sense of confidence in the safety of the Titanic, primarily due to its reputation as the safest and unsinkable ship of the time. This may have led to a delayed and ineffective response to the iceberg warnings. The lookouts without binoculars, a critical failure. Another crucial factor contributing to the impact was the lack of binoculars for the lookouts responsible for the ship's surveillance. This detail is often cited as one of the main failures that contributed to the Titanic not spotting the iceberg in time to avoid the collision. The lack of binoculars. The lookouts at the Titanic's bow, Frederick Fleet and Reginald Lee, had no binoculars to help them observe distant objects. At the time, they relied solely on their naked eyes to search for obstacles ahead of the ship. The lack of binoculars was the result of an organizational error. The binoculars were locked in a cupboard, but for unknown reasons, the key was lost shortly before the voyage. Without binoculars, the lookouts were at a significant disadvantage, as their view of the horizon was extremely limited at the speed at which the Titanic was sailing. The poor visibility. On the night of the disaster, visibility conditions were particularly challenging. The sky was exceptionally clear with no clouds, and there was an unusual calm on the sea, which caused the waters to be extraordinarily still. However, in contrast, the absence of waves also made it more difficult to spot the iceberg, as the lack of reflections on the waves hindered the detection of large ice blocks from a distance. The failure to spot the iceberg. When the lookouts finally spotted the iceberg, it was already too late to avoid the collision. Frederick Fleet spotted the iceberg at a distance of about 500 meters, 1,640 feet, from the ship. At that distance, the Titanic did not have enough time to change its course or stop effectively. Fleet raised the alarm, but it was too late to avoid the impact, which occurred around 37 seconds after he saw the iceberg. The collision with the iceberg. The fatal moment. The Titanic collided with the iceberg at 12:40 a.m. on April 15, 1912, after a series of events that culminated in an unforeseen tragedy. The ship was traveling at a speed of about 22 knots, a very high speed for the conditions of the night and the presence of icebergs in the region. The direct collision. The Titanic struck the iceberg on its starboard side, right side, and the impact was explosive. Although the Titanic tried to turn, the speed was so high that the maneuver wasn't effective enough to avoid the collision. The crash ripped open the ship's hull along approximately 90 meters, 300 feet, damaging the watertight compartments that were designed to protect the ship from flooding. The impact breaking the hull. The iceberg wasn't large enough to cause a complete hull failure, but the force of the impact broke the ship's steel plates, allowing water to flood the first 6 watertight compartments. These compartments were supposed to be isolated and prevent the ship from sinking, but due to the number of compartments affected, the Titanic began to lean forward and progressively sink. The Titanic and the watertight compartment design. Even with the watertight compartments designed to protect the ship from sinking, The Titanic was not prepared to handle the amount of water that entered so quickly. The water exceeded the height of the watertight compartments and spread to others, accelerating the sinking process. What could have been done? The Titanic disaster was caused by a combination of communication failures, poor planning, and circumstantial factors. Some elements that could have made a difference include slowing down. If the Titanic had reduced its speed or changed course based on the warnings about icebergs, the collision could have been avoided or, at the very least, minimized. Lookouts with binoculars. If the lookouts had binoculars to observe ahead of the ship, they would have spotted the iceberg earlier, which would have given them enough time to steer away or reduce speed in time. A more agile response to the alerts. The Titanic's crew could have been more proactive in taking the iceberg warnings seriously and taking preventive measures to avoid the disaster. Conclusion. The impact with the iceberg was the culmination of a series of failures that transformed the Titanic from a symbol of advanced technology and safety into a historical tragedy. The late warning, the lack of binoculars for the lookouts, and the ship's high speed all contributed to the inability to avoid the collision. The Titanic disaster, which resulted in the loss of over 1,500 lives, remains one of the most significant and tragic maritime accidents in history. The chaos during the sinking, lifeboat preparation and launch, the struggle for survival, and the challenges faced by passengers. The beginning of the chaos, the alarm and underestimation of the severity. When the Titanic collided with the iceberg at around 11:40 p.m. on April 14, 1912, the initial impact was not perceived as an imminent threat by most passengers and crew. Many thought the incident was minor, and the ship appeared to continue its course without major issues. Initial assessment. The crew took about 20 minutes to assess the extent of the damage. The chief engineer informed Captain Edward Smith that water was entering several watertight compartments. Based on this assessment, it was clear that the Titanic was doomed to sink. Underestimation of danger. Passengers, especially those in first class, initially didn't take the situation seriously. Many remained in their cabins or gathered in the lounges, believing the idea that the Titanic was unsinkable. This confidence caused a delay in evacuation. The lifeboats, an insufficient quantity. The Titanic was equipped with 20 lifeboats, with a total capacity for only 1,178 people, although the ship carried over 2,200 people, including passengers and crew. This was less than half the number needed to save everyone on board. This limitation was a combination of outdated regulations and the designer's decisions to prioritize aesthetic space on the deck. The launch order. Captain Smith ordered the lifeboats to be prepared and launched, following the Women and Children First protocol. However, this rule was inconsistently interpreted, leading to tension and confusion. Underutilized lifeboats. In the early moments, many lifeboats were launched with fewer people than their maximum capacity. For example, Lifeboat Number 1, which could accommodate 40 people, was launched with only 12 passengers. Passenger hesitation and the crew's lack of training contributed to this. Time shortage. As the ship sank more rapidly than expected, it became impossible to launch all the lifeboats in an organized manner. The last lifeboats were launched in haste, often with people jumping into the sea in an attempt to reach them. The struggle for survival. As the Titanic tilted and sank, chaos took over. The water temperature in the North Atlantic was -2 degrees Celsius, making survival in the water almost impossible for more than a few minutes. Desperation on the decks. Passengers fought to find space in the lifeboats, and disorganization led to riots. Some crew members used weapons to try to maintain order, while others, like Officer Lightoller, tried to strictly follow protocol. The final moments of the Titanic. At 2:20 a.m. on April 15th, the Titanic split in two and sank completely. Many passengers and crew members who didn't find a place in the lifeboats jumped into the sea in hopes of reaching a lifeboat or a piece of floating debris. The challenges in the lifeboats. For those who managed to find a place in the lifeboats, the challenges were far from over. Overcrowding and underutilization. Some lifeboats were overloaded and unstable, while others had ample space but didn't return to rescue people in the water out of fear of being capsized by the desperate crowd. Hypothermia. Most survivors in the lifeboats were exposed to the extreme cold without adequate protection. Many were already soaked by the freezing water, which accelerated the effects of hypothermia. The anguish of the survivors. In the lifeboats, the sound of screams from those drowning or dying of cold in the sea was unbearable. Lifeboat number 4 managed to rescue some people from the water, but most of the lifeboats remained at a distance. The heroic response of some crew members. Despite the chaos, there were acts of heroism by some crew members and passengers. The Titanic's band. The orchestra musicians continued playing until the final moments, trying to maintain calm and give hope to the passengers. Heroes among the officers. Officer Lightoller took on a leadership role, organizing the evacuation and ensuring the lifeboats were not launched with excessive weight. People like Isidore and Ida Strauss, the first-class couple, refused to board the lifeboats, choosing to stay together until the end. Ida is said to have told her husband, "Wherever you go, I will go." The rescue by the Carpathia. The survivors in the lifeboats were rescued by the RMS Carpathia, which arrived at the scene around 4 a.m., about 2 hours after the Titanic had sunk. Of the more than 2,200 passengers and crew, only 706 survived. The final moments. Many survivors were in shock or severely weakened by exposure to the cold. The psychological impact. The survivors carried the emotional scars of the tragedy for the rest of their lives, reliving the horrors of that night in subsequent testimonies. Conclusion. The chaos during the sinking of the Titanic revealed structural, organizational, and human failures. The insufficiency of lifeboats, the disorganization during boarding, and the desperate fight for survival turned the tragedy into an event that marked history. However, the moments of heroism and sacrifice continue to be remembered as symbols of resilience and humanity amid disaster. The final moment of the Titanic. The ship's break and sinking into the ocean. The situation in the final moments. As the Titanic approached its final moments, chaos and tragedy had already taken over. Water was rapidly flooding the lower compartments, causing the ship to tilt at an increasingly steep angle. The ship's tilt. Around 2:10 a.m. on April 15, 1912, the angle of the bow's tilt became extreme, with many passengers and crew desperately holding on to avoid slipping. Dramatic scenes on the deck. Passengers who had not yet boarded the lifeboats faced impossible choices: jump into the icy Atlantic or remain aboard as the ship sank. The lights going out. Until the final moments, the lights on the Titanic remained on, thanks to the efforts of the engine room crew. When they finally went out, the ship was engulfed in darkness, making the situation even more terrifying. The break of the Titanic. One of the most striking images of the disaster was the breaking of the Titanic, which occurred in the final minutes of the sinking. Forces at play. As water filled the forward compartments, the bow became fully submerged while the stern remained above water. This imbalance created extreme stress on the ship's structure, particularly near the third funnel, where the propeller shaft tunnel was located. The rupture. Around 2:18 a.m., the ship split in two. The rupture was accompanied by a deafening sound of metal tearing. The already submerged bow sank quickly, pulling the stern down with it for a few moments. The stern's movement. After the rupture, the stern fell back into the ocean, floating momentarily before beginning to sink. Some witnesses reported that it almost turned vertical before disappearing beneath the waves. Testimonies from the survivors. People in the lifeboats and in the water watched in horror as the Titanic's final moments unfolded. The anguish of the survivors. Many described the terrible sounds, the noise of metal breaking, screams of panic, and finally, a chilling silence after the ship disappeared. Visual impact. Survivors like Charles Lightoller and Harold Bride reported how the stern rose into the air before plunging, creating a horrifying sight. The total submersion. After the break, the Titanic quickly disappeared beneath the waves. The descent to the ocean floor. The bow sank first, reaching the bottom of the Atlantic in about 6 minutes. The stern, more fragmented, took a bit longer. The wreckage spread out over an area of approximately 600 meters. The depth. The Titanic rests about 3,800 meters deep in the North Atlantic, where it was discovered only in 1985. The legacy of the final moment. The final moments of the Titanic symbolize both human fragility and the failure to foresee and respond to disasters. The emotional impact of this scene remains alive in the collective memory, depicted in films, documentaries, and survivor accounts. Conclusion. The sinking of the Titanic, culminating in the breaking of the ship and its submersion in the ocean, was a sequence of events that combined the horror of destruction with the resilience of those who witnessed and survived. This tragic chapter in maritime history serves as a reminder of the consequences of human negligence and the uncontrollable forces of nature. Rescue and survivors. The arrival of the Carpathia and the lives saved, with a focus on women and children. The moments after the sinking. After the Titanic disappeared beneath the icy waters of the North Atlantic at around 2:20 a.m. on April 15, 1912, the survivors faced despair amidst the darkness and extreme cold. The struggle for survival. Many remained in the freezing water, where hypothermia quickly became fatal, while others were aboard overcrowded and disorganized lifeboats. The calls for help. During the first few minutes after the sinking, the desperate cries of hundreds of people in the water echoed through the night. Over time, the sounds faded as most succumbed to the cold. The arrival of the RMS Carpathia. The RMS Carpathia, a passenger ship from the Cunard Line, became the savior of the survivors. Response to the SOS. Led by Captain Arthur Rostron, the Carpathia immediately responded to the Titanic's distress signal, sailing at full speed, even through dangerous ice-filled waters, to reach the survivors. Time of arrival. The Carpathia arrived at the disaster site at 4 a.m., approximately 1 hour and 40 minutes after the Titanic sank. Search for survivors. The rescue began immediately. The Carpathia located and retrieved survivors from the lifeboats over several hours, facing challenges such as extreme cold and adverse sea conditions. Women and children in focus. One of the key features of the rescue was the prevalence of women and children among the survivors. The Women and Children First rule. The evacuation order of Women and Children First was applied on several lifeboats, although not always consistently. This led to a higher survival rate for these groups. Survival rates. Women. Approximately 74% of the women aboard survived. Children. About 50% of the children survived. Men. Only around 20% of the men survived, partly due to the priority given to women and children and the insufficient number of lifeboats. Notable cases. Molly Brown, a first-class passenger known as the unsinkable Molly Brown, stood out for organizing the survivors in her lifeboat and encouraging everyone to row. Eva Hart, a 7-year-old girl who survived but lost her father in the tragedy, became one of the most well-known voices among the survivors. Conditions in the lifeboats. Even after escaping the Titanic, the survivors faced difficult conditions. Overcrowding and underutilization. Some lifeboats were overcrowded, while others left with less than half of their capacity, further aggravating the tragedy. Exposure to the cold. Many suffered from hypothermia, even in the lifeboats, due to the extremely low temperatures. The uncertainty. In the lifeboats, anxiety was palpable as survivors waited for hours in the dark, unsure whether they would be rescued. Reception on the Carpathia. The survivors received immediate attention and help aboard the Carpathia. Welcome and care. The crew and passengers of the Carpathia provided clothing, blankets, and food to the rescued. Doctors on board tended to the injured and those suffering from shock or hypothermia. Survivor Registry. The Carpathia's crew began recording the names of the survivors to notify their families and the authorities. Arrival in New York. The Carpathia arrived in New York on April 18th, where the survivors were welcomed by anxious crowds and journalists. The impact of the rescue. The story of the Titanic survivors deeply moved the world and highlighted issues of maritime safety and social inequality. Stories of sacrifice and heroism. Accounts of heroism, such as crew members who stayed behind on the Titanic to help others, contrasted with the personal tragedies of families being separated. Legacy of the survivors. Many survivors, especially the children, carried the trauma of the disaster for their entire lives, while others dedicated their remaining years to telling the story so that the tragedy would never be forgotten. Conclusion. The rescue of the survivors by the Carpathia was an act of heroism and humanity amidst one of the greatest maritime tragedies in history. While many perished, the lives saved highlight the power of solidarity and quick action in times of crisis. Legends and heroines. Stories of courage, like Molly Brown's, and the controversy surrounding Bruce Ismay. Molly Brown, the unsinkable heroine. Margaret Molly Brown is one of the most well-known names associated with the Titanic tragedy. A first-class passenger, she became famous for her bravery and leadership during the disaster. Who was Molly Brown? Born into a humble family in the United States, Molly became wealthy after her husband, J.J. Brown, succeeded in the mining industry. Known for her vibrant personality, charity work, and independent spirit, Molly was a popular figure in high society. Her role during the disaster. After being placed in lifeboat number 6, Molly immediately took on a leadership role. She encouraged the survivors to row to keep warm and insisted that they return to rescue those still in the water. However, the lifeboat crew feared that this would put everyone at risk. Molly provided emotional comfort to the survivors, using her charisma to ease their panic. The legacy of Molly Brown. After being rescued by the Carpathia, Molly organized a fundraiser to assist the poorest survivors and continued to advocate for the needy throughout her life. Her nickname, the unsinkable Molly Brown, was given years later and solidified by theater and cinema, including the famous 1964 musical. Bruce Ismay, the most criticized man of the Titanic. Joseph Bruce Ismay, president of the White Star Line, is one of the most controversial figures of the Titanic tragedy. His presence aboard the ship and his actions during the disaster have been intensely debated. Who was Bruce Ismay? As the leader of the White Star Line, Ismay was responsible for conceiving the idea of the luxurious Olympic-class ships, including the Titanic. He was traveling on the Titanic to promote the vessel and represent the company on its maiden voyage. The controversy surrounding his actions. Survival in collapsible lifeboat C. Ismay boarded one of the last available lifeboats, which was already partially full. He justified his action by saying there were no more women or children in the area when he entered. Many criticized him for not following the honor code of the time, which expected men, especially leaders, to stay aboard in a disaster situation. The public reaction. Ismay was heavily criticized by newspapers and public opinion, being labeled a coward and a fugitive. The press compared him to heroes who remained on the ship, such as Captain Edward Smith and Chief Engineer Joseph Bell. He was particularly vilified in the United States, where his presence in a lifeboat was seen as a symbol of selfishness and privilege. The impact on Ismay's life. After the disaster, Ismay lived in seclusion and never fully recovered from the accusations and public humiliation. Survivor testimonies suggested that he helped carry women and children to the lifeboats before saving himself, but this was not enough to redeem his reputation. Other stories of heroism. In addition to Molly Brown, other figures emerged as heroes and heroines in the disaster. Ida and Isidore Strauss. The elderly couple, owners of Macy's department store, refused to be separated. Isidore offered his spot in the lifeboat to his wife, Ida, but she refused, saying, "Where you go, I will go." Both perished in the sinking. Violet Jessup. A stewardess on the Titanic, Violet survived the disaster by helping to care for passengers in the lifeboats. She would also survive the sinking of the Britannic in 1916, earning the nickname the Unsinkable Lady. Workers and crew. Many crew members sacrificed their lives to help passengers. Violinist Wallace Hartley and his band played until the last moment to calm passengers, becoming symbols of courage. The contrast between heroes and controversies. The Titanic disaster revealed the best and worst of human nature. Anonymous heroes. Many ordinary passengers, especially among the men of third class, helped their families and others reach the lifeboats, knowing they were doomed. Condemnation of the privileged. While individuals like Molly Brown and the Titanic band were celebrated, figures like Bruce Ismay faced criticism, reflecting the inequality and social expectations of the time. Conclusion. The stories of heroism and controversy that emerged from the Titanic helped shape the complex narrative of the disaster. While figures like Molly Brown are remembered as symbols of courage, the controversy surrounding Bruce Ismay highlights the social and ethical tensions of the event. These narratives continue to fascinate and move people, keeping the Titanic legacy alive in the popular imagination. Discovery of the wreckage. The 1985 expedition and findings from the Titanic's wreck. The context of the discovery. 4 decades after the sinking in 1912, the Titanic remained lost in the depths of the Atlantic Ocean. Many efforts were made to locate the wreck, but it was only in 1985 that the search proved successful, thanks to advances in technology and the determination of scientists and explorers. Robert Ballard and the WHOI mission. The discovery of the wreckage was led by oceanographer Dr. Robert Ballard, in partnership with the Woods Hole Oceanographic Institution, WHOI, and the Institut Français de Recherche pour l'exploitation de la mer, IFREMER. The mission used innovative technologies such as remotely operated underwater robots and high-definition cameras. The wreck location. The wreckage was found at a depth of 3,800 meters in the North Atlantic Ocean, about 600 kilometers south of Newfoundland, Canada. The exact location revealed that the Titanic was farther from its last known position than previously thought, due to ocean currents. The discovery of the wreckage. The 1985 expedition found the Titanic in surprisingly good condition, though also deteriorated by time and the extreme pressures of the ocean. The ship's division. One of the biggest revelations was the confirmation that the Titanic had broken into two before sinking. The two main sections, the bow and the stern, were separated by about 600 meters, surrounded by a vast field of wreckage. State of preservation. The bow was relatively well preserved, with recognizable structures such as railings, anchors, and parts of the deck. The stern, on the other hand, was much more damaged, a result of the impact with the ocean floor and the violent rupture. Scientific and archaeological discoveries. The exploration of the wreckage brought important insights into the disaster and life aboard the Titanic. Personal items and artifacts. Among the wreckage, personal items were found, such as suitcases, shoes, porcelain dishes, and kitchen utensils. These items revealed details about the passengers and life aboard the ship. One of the most iconic images is of a pair of shoes placed side by side, suggesting where a victim may have rested. Environmental impact. Scientists observed the formation of rustic-less, stalactite-like formations created by bacteria that corrode iron. These bacteria are slowly decomposing the wreckage, suggesting that the Titanic may disappear in a few decades. Evidence of the impact. Examinations of the bow indicated that the watertight compartments were seriously damaged by the impact with the iceberg, confirming historical reports about the beginning of the sinking. The revolutionary technology of the expedition. The discovery of the Titanic was made possible by significant technological advances. Argo and Jason Jr. The Argo system consisted of a submersible vehicle equipped with cameras and lights to explore the ocean floor. Later, the robot Jason Jr. was used to capture detailed images of the ship's interior. Use of sonar. The team used side-scan sonar to locate the signature of the wreckage on the ocean floor. Controversies and ethics of exploration. Since its discovery, the Titanic has become a site of great interest, but also of controversy. Subsequent expeditions. After 1985, other expeditions were organized to study the wreckage and recover artifacts. This sparked debates about the balance between historical preservation and commercial exploitation. Preservation versus commercialization. Some criticize the removal of artifacts, arguing that the Titanic should be treated as a sacred tomb for the more than 1,500 victims. In 2012, UNESCO declared the Titanic wreckage a protected heritage site, prohibiting its exploration without official authorization. Cultural and scientific impact. The discovery of the wreck reignited global interest in the Titanic and raised new questions about the disaster. Movies and documentaries. The discovery inspired works like James Cameron's film Titanic, 1997, which brought a new generation of fans to the story. Documentaries and TV specials have explored the mysteries and stories of the ship. Advances in underwater archaeology. The 1985 expedition set new standards for wreck exploration, utilizing technologies that continue to evolve. The Titanic's legacy beneath the ocean. The Titanic wreckage remains a powerful reminder of the disaster and the lives lost. Symbol of mourning and memory. For many, the Titanic is a submerged memorial telling a story of courage, tragedy, and lessons learned. The future of the wreckage. With the accelerated deterioration caused by ocean conditions, scientists estimate that the Titanic may completely disappear by the end of the 21st century, highlighting the importance of documenting and preserving its history while possible. Conclusion. The discovery of the Titanic in 1985 was a historical and technological milestone, revealing unprecedented details about the sinking and reigniting global fascination with the tragedy. Although the wreckage is slowly vanishing, its cultural and scientific impact continues to inspire explorations and reflections on human fragility in the face of nature. The Titanic legacy and the impact of the tragedy on subsequent generations. The Titanic tragedy was not just a dramatic shipwreck event, it became one of the most impactful stories in modern history, echoing through generations and leaving a profound legacy. Over more than a century, the Titanic transformed into a cultural and historical icon, influencing society in complex ways. Its legacy is not limited to the event itself, but to how it shaped perceptions, inspired change, and continues to resonate in collective memory. Lessons in safety and engineering. After the disaster, there was a significant overhaul of maritime safety standards. The Titanic security failures, which led to such a large loss of life, triggered substantial changes in the maritime sector. Changes in maritime safety laws. The disaster led to the creation of the International Convention for the Safety of Life at Sea, SALAS, in 1914, which established mandatory regulations for ships regarding lifeboats, communication, emergency signaling, and safety measures. The requirement for enough lifeboats for everyone on board, along with the improvement of radio systems for communication in times of emergency, became a milestone in passenger safety. Advances in naval engineering. Although the Titanic was designed with technological advances for its time, such as watertight compartments, the tragedy highlighted the limits of safety concepts. The hull's failure in the collision with the iceberg prompted a reconsideration in the construction and design of subsequent ships. Engineers began to focus more on structural resilience and improving fault detection systems, forever changing how ships are designed and operated. Cultural impact and the arts. The Titanic was never just a tragedy. It became a symbol of an era, a type of society, and a universal tragedy that transcends cultural borders. Its story has been immortalized across various media, from cinema to literature, through documentaries and music. Films and media. James Cameron's Titanic, 1997, is one of the highest-grossing films of all time and brought the ship's story to new generations. The film explored the fictional romance of Jack and Rose, but also captured the magnitude of the tragedy, becoming one of the most beloved and remembered films of the 20th century. Documentaries, books, and plays have also kept the Titanic's memory alive, shaping the narrative and the legends associated with it. Symbolizing class and human tragedy. The distinction between classes on the Titanic, first class, second class, and third class, was also a recurring theme in cultural depictions. The tragedy exposed the social disparities of the time and how class influenced people's fates, with many lower-class victims unable to escape due to lack of access to lifeboats. The anonymous heroes of the tragedy, often represented by men and women who sacrificed their lives to save others, continue to be a powerful source of inspiration for courage and altruism. Emotional and social legacy. For subsequent generations, the Titanic symbolized the fragility of life and the eternal struggle between technological advancement and the inevitability of human fate. The tragedy sparked profound reflection on human nature, death, fame, and collective memory. Personal and collective significance. The Titanic represents the interaction between human progress, such as building an unsinkable ship, and the relentless force of nature. The story reminds us of human vulnerability, the uncertainty of the future, and the fragility of life. Each year, thousands of tourists visit the wreck site, bringing with them a sense of reverence and reflection. Memorial and tribute. The wreck site, with its submerged remains, has become a global memorial. Many families keep the memory of their loved ones who perished alive, and the stories of those who survived continue to inspire the fight for survival and the preservation of historical memory. Philosophical and existential reflections. The story of the Titanic provokes philosophical reflections that continue to resonate, particularly concerning technology and progress. Progress and human arrogance. The Titanic was, by many, considered the pinnacle of human progress, a marvel of naval engineering. However, its sudden and catastrophic destruction raised questions about the limits of human arrogance. How can man control nature, and what role do luck or destiny play in our lives? The Titanic reminds us that, no matter how much we may try, we never have full control over the events of the world. The need for preparation and adaptability. The failure of preparation and the ignorance of danger signs, such as warnings about icebergs, became central points in the lessons drawn from the disaster. The tragedy teaches the importance of being prepared for the unexpected and adapting to circumstances. The Titanic as a metaphor for other tragedies. The legacy of the Titanic extends beyond the sinking itself. The idea of something seemingly invincible succumbing unexpectedly serves as a metaphor for other human tragedies throughout time, where overconfidence in invulnerability and progress is suddenly shattered. Reflection on modern civilization. In a broader sense, the Titanic is seen as a metaphor for the judgment errors of many modern societies, especially regarding issues of sustainability, technology, and social inequality. The story of its sinking can be used to reflect on how our dependence on technology and infrastructure can be both a blessing and a curse. Conclusion. The Titanic in the collective imagination. The legacy of the Titanic remains strong in the collective imagination as a story of tragedy, but also of resilience, of lessons learned, and of a continuous search for understanding about fate and human nature. As the ocean slowly consumes its wreckage, the Titanic continues to live in memory, as one of the greatest lessons in modern history about the price of progress and the courage in the face of adversity. The Titanic tragedy, which occurred over a century ago, remains one of the most emblematic stories in modern history. The sinking not only changed the course of navigation and maritime safety, but also left us valuable lessons about human nature, progress, and the unpredictability of fate. The Titanic is a constant reminder that, no matter how far we advance with our technology and confidence, we must never underestimate the power of nature or the fragility of life. As the story of the Titanic continues to be explored, whether in documentaries, movies, or studies, it teaches us about courage, sacrifice, and the importance of being prepared for the unexpected. This narrative is not just a reflection on a tragic event, but also a cultural legacy that transcends generations. If you were moved by this story, or if you're curious to learn more about other historical events that shaped the world, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, like the video, and share it with your friends. Let's continue exploring these incredible stories and the mysteries that have marked our history.